Welcome back to another deep dive into the legendary tales of the Fallout universe. Before we begin this epic journey, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible Wasteland stories that shape the post-nuclear world. Picture this. The year is 2241. 80 years have passed since the Vault Dweller emerged from Vault 13 and changed the fate of California forever. But now, deep in the northern wastes, a small tribal village called Arroyo faces extinction. Their crops are dying. Their water purifier fails more each day. The harsh desert sun beats down on cracked earth that once flourished with life. In the center of this dying settlement stands a young tribal warrior, chosen by ancient rites and village prophecy. The elder of Arroyo, wrinkled hands trembling, with age and desperation, places a sacred task upon this warrior's shoulders. Find the holy GECK, save our people. But what the chosen one doesn't yet know is that this quest will uncover the most terrifying conspiracy in post-war America. Somewhere in the wasteland, behind sealed blast doors and reinforced steel, government officials in pristine uniforms discuss plans that would make even the Master's unity seem merciful. They speak of pure strain humans, of cleansing the mainland, of a toxin so deadly it would eliminate 99% of all life on Earth. These are not raiders or super mutants planning destruction. These are the remnants of the United States government itself. The chosen one will discover settlements where children are sold like cattle in slave markets. They will witness the rise of the new California Republic, a fledgling democracy trying to bring order to chaos. They will meet talking Deathclaws who question what it truly means to be human. They will infiltrate military bases where soldiers in advanced power armor prepare for a genocide that would dwarf the Great War itself. But perhaps most chilling of all, they will learn that their own village, their own people, their own blood, relatives have been captured and taken to a place that officially doesn't exist. An oil rig far off the California coast where the pre-war government continues its work in isolation, viewing everyone on the mainland as expendable test subjects for their twisted vision of genetic purity. The sound of tribal drums echoes across the desert as our story begins. The elder's voice carries the weight of generations as she speaks of destiny and choice. A Geiger counter clicks softly in the distance, measuring radiation levels that have poisoned the land for decades. Radio static crackles with fragments of transmissions from unknown sources. Speaking in military codes. This is not just the story of one person's journey across the wasteland. This is the story of how a single tribal warrior discovered that the most dangerous enemy humanity ever faced wasn't some mutated beast or foreign invader, but the corrupted remnants of their own government, hiding behind patriotic rhetoric while all planning the systematic extermination of every living thing they deemed impure. The weight of the wasteland presses down like the crushing heat of the desert sun. Every choice matters. Every decision carries consequences that will ripple across generations. The path ahead is treacherous, filled with moral dilemmas that have no clean answers, populated by characters whose motivations blur the lines between heroism and survival, between progress and destruction. As the chosen one takes their first steps beyond the safety of tribal lands, they carry more than just supplies and weapons. They carry the hopes of a dying village, the legacy of the Vault Dweller, and the terrible responsibility of preventing a Holocaust that would make the nuclear war seem like a mere prelude to true devastation. The greatest mystery of the post-nuclear world is about to unfold. A conspiracy so vast, so methodical, so coldly calculated that it will challenge everything the chosen one believes about humanity, about government, about the very nature of survival in a world that has already ended once. But first, our story must begin where all great journeys start, with a single step into the unknown, carrying nothing but courage and the desperate hope that Somewhere in the wasteland lies salvation for a people balanced on the edge of extinction. In the year 2241, the wasteland of Northern California stretched endlessly under a merciless sun that seemed to leech the very life from the earth below. This was not the relatively civilized southern regions where the new California Republic was establishing trade routes and democratic governance. This was the harsh frontier where survival depended on water conservation, careful crop rotation, and the ancient wisdom passed down through generations of post-war survivors. Arroyo village sat nestled in a valley that had once been green and fertile, back when the Vault Dweller first established this settlement after emerging from Vault 13. The adobe buildings, constructed in the old Pueblo style, rose from the desert floor like organic growths, their thick walls designed to keep the interior cool during the blazing days and warm during the cold desert nights. Wooden walkways connected the different levels of the village, and everywhere the influence of both tribal culture and Vault-Tec technology could be seen blending together. But now, 8 decades later, something was terribly wrong. The corn stalks that should have been reaching toward the sky with green vitality instead hung brown and withered. The Brahmin, those mutated two-headed cattle that provided milk and meat for the village, grew thinner each day as their grazing grounds turned to dust. Most troubling of all, the water purifier that had sustained the village since its founding was failing more frequently, its pre-war components finally succumbing to age and the constant strain of desert life. The village gardens, once the pride of Arroyo, now showed patches of dead earth where nothing would grow. The fruit trees planted by the first generation of settlers produced smaller yields each season. Even the hardy desert plants that had adapted to post-war conditions seemed to struggle against some unseen force that was slowly poisoning the very soil they depended upon. In the center of this struggling community lived the Chosen One, a young tribal whose very name spoke to the weight of expectation carried upon their shoulders. Born into the village 20 years after its founding, they had grown up hearing stories of their ancestor, the legendary Vault Dweller who had emerged from underground to save the wasteland from the Master's super mutant army. These were not just family stories, but village mythology, tales told around evening fires that shaped the identity of everyone in Arroyo. The Chosen One had been trained from childhood in the traditional ways of tribal warfare. They could track a rad scorpion across solid rock, identify edible plants in the harshest terrain, and craft spears that could pierce even the thick hide of a Deathclaw. But they had also learned to operate the village's pre-war technology, understanding the delicate balance between ancient wisdom and Vault-Tec engineering that kept their community alive in an unforgiving world. Their mentor and guide was Hakunen, the village shaman, whose knowledge of both traditional healing and wasteland medicine had saved countless lives over the decades. Hakunen moved through the village like a living bridge between the old world and the new, his weathered face marked by ritual scars that told stories of spiritual journeys into the desert's deepest mysteries. When he spoke of the spirits that inhabited the wasteland, even the most practical villagers listened with respect, but it was the elder who commanded the deepest reverence in Arroyo, the daughter of the Vault Dweller herself. She had lived through the village's entire history, from its hopeful founding to its current desperate circumstances. Her gray hair was braided with small pieces of pre-war technology, circuit boards, and transistors that served as both decoration and spiritual symbols of humanity's lost knowledge. When she walked through the village, her cane tapping against the wooden walkways, people stopped their work to bow their heads in respect. The elder's eyes held the weight of terrible knowledge. She remembered stories her parent had told about Vault 13, about the water chip crisis that had first driven someone from underground safety into the dangerous wasteland. She knew the location of that legendary vault, information that had been passed down through the family like a sacred trust. But more than that, she understood that their current crisis was connected to something much larger than simple crop failure or equipment malfunction. In recent months, strange reports had filtered in from the few traders who still visited Arroyo. Caravans spoke of increased military activity near the coast, of soldiers in armor unlike anything seen since before the war. Prospectors mentioned radio signals broadcasting on frequencies that should have been silent for decades. Most disturbing of all were the stories of entire settlements simply vanishing, their inhabitants gone without explanation, leaving behind only empty buildings and the lingering scent of ozone that suggested advanced energy weapons. The villages. Other inhabitants each contributed their own skills to the community's survival. Modoc served as the village's primary hunter, his knowledge of animal behavior and migration patterns essential for providing meat during the lean months. His weathered hands could fashion traps that would catch even the craftiest wasteland creatures, and his stories of tracking expeditions into the deep desert provided both entertainment and valuable survival knowledge for the younger generation. Clint functioned as the village's main guard, his constant vigilance protecting Arroyo from the raiders and wild animals that occasionally threatened the settlement. His spear technique was legendary among the tribals, and his tactical knowledge had been honed through years of skirmishes with hostile forces. But lately, even Clint seemed troubled by reports from the outer settlements, his usual confidence. Shaken by tales of enemies with technology that surpassed anything in the tribal arsenal. Jordan, the village's primary farmer, understood better than anyone how dire their agricultural situation had become. His attempts to develop drought-resistant crops had met with limited success, and his careful soil analysis revealed contamination patterns that didn't match typical radiation exposure. Something else was affecting their land, something that traditional farming wisdom couldn't explain or counter. As the days grew shorter and the crisis deepened, the village council met more frequently, their discussions growing more heated as traditional solutions proved inadequate. The younger villagers looked to the Chosen One with increasing expectation, remembering the stories of their ancestors' heroic journey and hoping that history might repeat itself. But the older residents understood that the wasteland of 2241 was far more complex and dangerous than the world the Vault Dweller had faced decades earlier. The stage was set for a journey that would test not just physical courage, but moral conviction. As the Chosen One prepared to leave behind everything familiar and venture into a wasteland where the greatest threats came not from mutated creatures or natural disasters, but from the cold calculations of human beings who had convinced themselves that genocide was a necessary tool for ensuring their vision of genetic purity. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Temple of Trials as the Chosen One approached the ancient structure that had stood sentinel over Arroyo since the village's founding. This was no ordinary building, but a testament to the Vault Dwellers' vision of combining pre-war technology with tribal wisdom. The temple's walls bore intricate carvings that told the story of humanity's fall and resurrection, while hidden sensors and automated systems tested each generation's worthiness to carry on the legacy. Cameron, the village's gate guard, stood beside the temple entrance with a mixture of pride and concern etched across his weathered features. He had watched the Chosen One grow from a curious child into a capable warrior, but the trials ahead would test more than physical prowess. They would examine the very soul of someone destined to venture into the wasteland's deadliest territories. Inside the temple's first chamber, ancient mechanisms hummed with barely contained energy. The Vault Dweller had designed these trials not as cruel tests, but as essential preparation for the horrors that awaited beyond Arroyo's protective walls. Each challenge represented a different aspect of wasteland survival, from combat reflexes to problem-solving under pressure, from moral decision-making to the ability to show mercy, even when violence seemed the only option. The Scorpion had presented the first trial, where massive rad scorpions skittered across sand-covered floors. These weren't the smaller variants found near trading posts, but full-grown specimens whose stingers could punch through leather armor with terrifying ease. The Chosen One moved through the chamber with calculated precision, each step carefully, placed to avoid triggering the creature's aggressive territorial instincts, while simultaneously positioning for decisive strikes when confrontation became unavoidable. But the temple's true test lay not in combat, but in the choices presented throughout. The trials. When faced with a wounded rad-scorpion pup separated from its pack, the Chosen One could choose between quick elimination or careful avoidance. When ancient computer terminals offered multiple solutions to mechanical puzzles, the path taken revealed fundamental aspects of character that would prove crucial in the challenges ahead. The temple's final chamber contained the most sophisticated of the Vault Dwellers' innovations. Here, holographic projections created scenarios that mimicked real Wasteland encounters, from negotiating with hostile traders to deciding the fate of captured raiders. These weren't simple combat simulations, but complex moral puzzles that required understanding human nature in all its contradictory complexity. As the trials concluded, the temple's main doors sealed shut behind the Chosen One, their soft pneumatic hiss marking the transition from student to proven warrior. Outside, the village had gathered in the central plaza, their faces reflecting a mixture of celebration and sorrow. They knew that success in the trials meant departure, and departure might well mean they would never see their chosen champion again. The elder emerged from her dwelling, carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth that had been blessed by generations of village shamans. Her movements were deliberate and ceremonial, each step part of a ritual that connected the present moment to the village's founding decades earlier. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had witnessed both triumph and tragedy in equal measure. The bundle contained artifacts that would have been priceless to any Wasteland trader. A Vault 13 jumpsuit, its blue fabric still vibrant despite the passage of decades, represented the technological heritage that ran in the Chosen One's bloodline. The accompanying Pip-Boy 2000, though primitive by pre-war standards, contained mapping software and radiation detection, capabilities that could mean the difference between life and death in hostile territories. But perhaps most important was the holodisk containing detailed information about Vault 13's location. The elder's hands trembled slightly as she transferred this precious data, knowing that she was passing on not just coordinates, but the key to understanding their people's true origins. The vault represented more than shelter from the nuclear holocaust. It embodied humanity's attempt to preserve civilization itself through careful planning and advanced technology. The GECK itself remained a mystery wrapped in pre-war propaganda and tribal mythology. Vault Tech promotional materials had described it as a Garden of Eden creation kit, promising to transform even the most devastated landscape into a thriving ecosystem. But the technical specifications suggested something far more complex, a terraforming device that required sophisticated knowledge to operate safely. As the ceremony concluded, Hakunin approached with his own gift, a collection of healing powders and antidotes derived from desert plants that most Wasteland doctors had never encountered. His knowledge of traditional medicine complemented the Pip-Boy's medical database, creating a comprehensive approach to health maintenance that acknowledged both scientific advancement and accumulated tribal wisdom. The village's children gathered around the Chosen One, their young faces filled with the kind of wonder that comes from witnessing legend in the making. To them, this wasn't just another hunting expedition or trading mission, but the beginning of an epic tale that would be retold around evening fires for generations to come. They understood instinctively that they were witnessing history, though none could imagine the true scope of the journey ahead. Clint offered tactical advice drawn from his years of combat experience, emphasizing the importance of adaptability in a wasteland where threats could range from savage animals to organized military forces. His warnings about the slave trade carried particular weight, as recent reports suggested that tribal communities were being specifically targeted for capture and exploitation. The farewell ritual extended into the evening hours with each villager, offering personal tokens of protection and remembrance. These weren't valuable in traditional terms, but carried emotional significance that would prove more sustaining than gold during the darkest moments of the quest ahead. A carved bone ornament from a childhood friend, a worn leather bracelet from a hunting mentor, a small pouch of blessed sand from the village's sacred grounds. As dawn approached, the chosen one stood at the village's edge, looking back at the only home they had ever known. The adobe buildings seemed smaller somehow, less imposing than they had in childhood, yet more precious for their fragility. Every doorway held memories. Every pathway echoed with conversations that might never be repeated. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, its vast emptiness both terrifying and liberating. Somewhere in that wilderness lay Vault 13 and the technology needed to save Arroyo. But between here and there waited challenges that would test every skill learned in 20 years of tribal life, moral dilemmas that had no clear answers, and enemies whose motivations defied simple categorization. The first steps into the wasteland felt heavier than any taken before, weighted with the responsibility of an entire community's survival. Behind lay safety and certainty. Ahead lay only the promise of adventure and the terrible possibility of failure. But the chosen one carried more than supplies and weapons into the unknown. They carried the accumulated wisdom of their people, the technological legacy of their ancestors, and the desperate hope that somewhere in the vast wasteland lay salvation for a village, balanced on the edge of extinction. The journey to save Arroyo had begun, though none could yet imagine that this quest would ultimately determine the fate of every living thing in post-war America. The wasteland sun had already begun its relentless assault by the time the chosen one crested the first ridge beyond Arroyo's protective valley. From this vantage point, the civilized world seemed to fade into memory, replaced by an endless expanse of cracked earth, twisted metal, and the skeletal remains of humanity's pre-war ambitions. The landscape told stories of devastation that no textbook could adequately describe, each rusted vehicle and collapsed overpass serving as a monument to technological hubris. The journey south toward Klamath began through terrain that shifted constantly between recognizable geography and alien hellscape. Ancient highways, their asphalt cracked and buckled by decades of thermal expansion, stretched toward horizons that wavered in the heat like mirages. Abandoned gas stations stood like tomb markers along these routes, their signs faded to illegibility, their pumps frozen in eternal silence. But the wasteland wasn't entirely lifeless. Hardy plants had adapted to the radioactive soil, their mutations creating forms that would have fascinated pre-war botanists and terrified them in equal measure. Barrel cacti grew to enormous sizes, their flesh glowing faintly in the darkness with accumulated radiation. Joshua trees twisted into impossible shapes, their branches reaching skyward like desperate prayers for redemption. Animal life persisted as well, though changed beyond recognition from their pre-war ancestors. Gecko tracks crisscrossed the sand, their distinctive three-toed prints leading to hidden dens carved into cliffsides. These weren't the small lizards that had once populated the California deserts, but creatures the size of large dogs. Their hide tough enough to turn knife blades, their pack hunting behavior making them formidable opponents, even for experienced warriors. The first settlement encountered on this journey presented itself gradually, beginning with scattered debris that suggested human habitation. Rusty cans that had once contained food, fragments of clothing that fluttered from thorn bushes like prayer flags, the occasional footprint in softer soil that indicated regular traffic along this route. These signs built anticipation and apprehension in equal measure, as any settlement could prove either sanctuary or trap depending on the motivations of its inhabitants. Klamath materialized from the wasteland like something conjured by desert. Spirits, its buildings constructed from salvaged materials, they created an architectural style unique to the post-war era. Pre-war concrete blocks supported walls made from flattened automobile hoods. Road signs served as roofing material there, reflective surfaces creating a patchwork of light and shadow that helped regulate interior temperatures. Every structure told the story of ingenuity born from desperate necessity. The town's inhabitants moved with the cautious efficiency of people who understood that survival required constant vigilance. Their clothing showed the practical repairs and modifications that marked true wasteland dwellers. Patches reinforcing wear points, extra pockets sewn in for carrying essential supplies, colors chosen for camouflage rather than fashion. These weren't settlers playing a frontier life, but genuine survivors who had earned their place through adaptability and resilience. Tor, the town's Brahmin herder, embodied the simple honesty that characterized many rural wasteland communities. His concerns were immediate and practical, focused on protecting his two-headed cattle from the predators that emerged from the wilderness each night. The Brahmin themselves represented one of the wasteland's most successful adaptations, their dual digestive systems allowing them to process vegetation too, contaminated for human consumption, while producing milk that sustained entire communities. But it was Sulik who would prove most significant to the Chosen One's journey. This tribal warrior from the Umbra tribe had traveled to Klamath searching for his sister Kurisu, who had been captured by slavers operating throughout the northern territories. His bone-piercing facial decorations and ritual scarification marked him as someone who maintained the old ways even while adapting to wasteland realities. His combat skills were immediately apparent, demonstrated through fluid movements that combined traditional spear techniques with pragmatic improvisation. Sulik's spiritual beliefs added depth to the growing party's philosophical foundation. His animistic worldview recognized spirits, inhabiting everything from ancient trees to pre-war technology, creating a framework for understanding the wasteland that went beyond simple survival mechanics. When he spoke of his Grampy bone, the carved artifact that guided his decision-making through spiritual consultation, it represented a connection to wisdom traditions that had helped his people survive when more technologically advanced civilizations had collapsed. The Gecko caves southeast of Klamath provided the Chosen One's first real test of combat, leadership, and tactical thinking. These underground complexes stretched for miles beneath the desert floor, their tunnels carved by creatures whose intelligence exceeded simple animal instinct. The geckos had established territorial boundaries, hunting patterns, and social hierarchies. That required careful study to navigate safely within these caves. The party encountered their first evidence of organized hostility from fellow humans. The Duntons, a family of cattle rustlers who had established themselves through intimidation and violence, represented the kind of predatory behavior that flourished in lawless territories. Their operations demonstrated how quickly civilizations' restraints could dissolve when formal authority structures disappeared. The moral choices presented throughout these early encounters established patterns that would define the entire journey. When confronting the Dunton's cattle rustling operation, the Chosen One could choose between violent confrontation, diplomatic negotiation, or elaborate schemes designed to expose their crimes to community justice. Each approach carried different consequences, both immediate and long-term, that would influence how other settlements perceive the growing party of travelers. Whiskey Bob still, hidden in the cave's deepest recesses, illustrated how wasteland entrepreneurs adapted pre-war knowledge to post-war realities. His alcohol production provided not just recreational drinking, but medical antiseptic, fuel additives, and trade goods valuable throughout the region. The technical knowledge required for distillation represented cultural continuity that linked present survival to pre-war scientific understanding. The journey's early days also revealed the complexity of Wasteland politics through encounters with various faction representatives. New California Republic scouts patrolled the southern routes, their presence suggesting organized government attempting to establish control over chaotic territories. But their authority remained limited, enforced more through economic incentives and military might, creating opportunities for both cooperation and conflict. As the party departed Klamath, with Sulik's spear skills and spiritual guidance added to their capabilities, the true scope of the Wasteland's challenges began to emerge. Radio transmissions picked up by the Pip-Boy suggested military activity far beyond anything explained by local conflicts. Trader gossip hinted at technological developments that seemed impossible given the region's apparent resource limitations. Strange lights in the night sky appeared too regular and purposeful to be natural phenomena. The road ahead led toward Den, a settlement whose reputation preceded it like a toxic cloud. Stories spoke of slave markets operating openly, of violence, accepted as routine entertainment, of moral compromises that would test even the most flexible ethical frameworks. But between Klamath and those darker territories lay miles of desert that would teach harsh lessons about survival, friendship, and the prices demanded by a world that had forgotten how to be gentle. The approach to Den revealed itself through a gradual accumulation of unsettling details that painted a portrait of humanity at its most desperate and depraved. Scattered bones marked the roadside, some clearly human despite the scavengers' attention, their positioning suggesting violence rather than natural death. Crude wooden posts bore warnings written in multiple languages, advertising bounties for escaped slaves and promising brutal punishment for those who interfered with legitimate business operations. The settlement itself sprawled across several acres of relatively flat ground, its buildings constructed with less care for defense and more attention to commercial accessibility than anything seen in Klamath. This was a place built for trade rather than safety, where profit took precedence over protection, where moral considerations yielded to market forces with an efficiency that would have impressed pre-war economists and horrified their philosophers. Metzger's operation dominated the eastern quarter of Den, his slave pens constructed with the same casual brutality that characterized everything about the man. Reinforced concrete walls, topped with razor wire, enclosed areas barely large enough for the human cargo contained within. The guards carried weapons that suggested military training, their discipline and coordination indicating this wasn't some haphazard criminal enterprise, but a sophisticated business operation with connections extending far beyond local territories. Within those pens, the chosen one discovered Vic, a trader from Vault City, whose capture illustrated how quickly circumstances could transform successful merchants into desperate prisoners. His technical knowledge and connections to more civilized territories made him valuable both as labor and as a source of information about trading routes and settlement vulnerabilities. But more than his practical value, Vic represented hope that even in Den's moral wasteland, decent people could survive and maintain their principles. The rescue operation required careful planning and considerable risk, as Metzger's organization had established itself through reputation as much as firepower. Direct assault would have been suicide, but negotiation revealed the complex economics that drove the slave trade throughout the northern territories. The prices demanded for human freedom reflected supply and demand calculations that reduced people to commodity status with chilling efficiency. Vic's gratitude went beyond simple relief at rescue, extending to genuine partnership based on shared values and complementary skills. His knowledge of wasteland geography, trading networks, and settlement politics provided invaluable intelligence for the journey ahead. More importantly, his mechanical expertise offered solutions to technological challenges that pure combat prowess couldn't address. Through conversations with Vic and other Den inhabitants, a disturbing pattern began to emerge regarding military activities throughout the region. Reports spoke of soldiers in armor, unlike anything produced by known factions, their equipment displaying technological sophistication that seemed impossible given the Wasteland's apparent resource limitations. These weren't new California Republic troops or Brotherhood of Steel paladins, but something entirely different. Something that suggested hidden infrastructure and advanced manufacturing capabilities. The slave traders themselves, when pressed for information through various means, revealed connections to buyers operating far from traditional settlement areas. Coastal facilities that officially didn't exist purchased specific types of prisoners, particularly those with certain genetic markers or technical skills. The prices paid for these specialized captives far exceeded normal market rates, suggesting purposes beyond simple labor exploitation. Tyler's gang, which controlled much of Den's illegal drug trade, provided additional evidence of sophisticated external connections through their access to medical supplies and chemical precursors. Their jet production required ingredients that weren't naturally occurring in the Wasteland, implying supply chains that extended to hidden facilities with advanced industrial capabilities. The purity and consistency of their products suggested quality control measures beyond anything possible with improvised equipment. But perhaps most disturbing were the radio transmissions that the Pip-Boy occasionally intercepted during quiet evening hours. Military frequencies that should have been silent carried coded messages discussing operational parameters, civilian population assessments, and what sounded like preparation for large-scale activities. The technical terminology used suggested speakers with formal military training and access to comprehensive intelligence databases. Rebecca, the den doctor whose clinic served as neutral ground for various criminal factions, possessed medical knowledge that raised additional questions about hidden infrastructure. Her surgical techniques and pharmaceutical supplies indicated training far beyond anything available in known settlements. When questioned about her background, her evasive answers suggested connections to institutions that maintained pre-war medical standards despite the apparent collapse of civilized society. The party's exploration of all Den's surrounding territories revealed abandoned facilities that told stories of recent occupation by unknown forces. Military-style campsites showed evidence of disciplined troops using equipment unfamiliar to Wasteland observers. Fuel deposits and supply caches suggested logistical capabilities that implied coordinated operations on a scale far exceeding anything attributed to known factions. Anna's Still, located in the ruins of an old ghost town, served as a gathering point for information from traveling traders and prospectors. Her customers spoke of increased security around certain coastal areas, of fishing vessels being turned away from traditional routes, of strange lights visible from offshore positions during nighttime hours. These reports painted a picture of significant activity in areas that maps showed as empty ocean. The technical specifications discovered in various abandoned facilities suggested research and development activities that seemed impossible given the region's apparent technological limitations. Computer terminals contained partial files discussing genetic research, population genetics, and what appeared to be large-scale biological assessments. The sophistication of this data implied access to resources and expertise that contradicted everything known about post-war civilization's collapse. Smitty's garage and then provided additional insights through his collection of salvaged technology from various sources. Among his inventory were component parts that displayed manufacturing quality exceeding anything produced by known factions. The metallurgy and electronic design suggested industrial capabilities that required substantial infrastructure and skilled personnel, neither of which should have existed in the apparent wasteland environment. As the party prepared to leave Den, loaded with new information and troubling questions, the scope of their mission began to expand beyond simple village salvation. The evidence suggested a hidden civilization with advanced technology, sophisticated organization, and purposes that remained unclear but carried ominous implications for everyone living in the apparent Wasteland. The road ahead led toward Modoc, a farming community whose drought problems might hold keys to understanding the broader environmental changes affecting the region. But the journey would take the party through territories where the evidence of hidden activities grew stronger, where the distinction between wasteland chaos and organized conspiracy became increasingly blurred, where every settlement might harbor connections to forces operating beyond the perception of ordinary survivors. Radio static crackled through the evening air as the party made camp in the ruins of a pre-war rest stop, the transmission fragments suggesting coordination between multiple locations using call signs that didn't match any known faction's communication protocols. The Wasteland's mysteries were deepening, revealing layers of complexity that transformed a simple rescue mission into something approaching espionage. As the true scope of post-war civilization's hidden architecture began to emerge from behind carefully constructed facades of chaos and abandonment. The journey from Den to Modoc revealed a wasteland gradually transforming from criminal enterprise territory into something resembling legitimate frontier civilization. The road itself showed signs of regular maintenance, with debris cleared and dangerous potholes filled using salvaged materials that spoke to organized community effort rather than individual survival instinct. Trading posts appeared at regular intervals, their proprietors displaying the kind of cautious optimism that suggested stable customer bases and predictable supply chains. Modoc presented itself as everything then was not, a community built around agricultural production rather than human exploitation. The settlement's layout reflected practical farming considerations, with irrigation channels carved to maximize water distribution, crop fields positioned to take advantage of natural drainage, patterns and storage facilities designed to protect harvests from both weather and wildlife. This was civilization attempting to reassert itself through productive labor rather than predatory capitalism. But even in Modoc's wholesome atmosphere, troubling undercurrents became apparent to careful observers. The drought affecting the region wasn't simply a natural weather pattern, but something more systematic, more purposeful in its impact on specific agricultural areas. Farmers spoke of soil conditions that defied traditional explanation, of crop failures that followed patterns too regular to be coincidental, of water sources that tested clean, yet somehow failed to nourish plant life effectively. Cornelius, the settlement's de facto leader, carried himself with the dignity of someone accustomed to responsibility, but worn down by circumstances beyond his control. His family had farmed this land for generations, accumulating knowledge about soil conditions, weather patterns, and crop rotation that represented genuine expertise earned through practical experience. Yet all this accumulated wisdom seemed inadequate against whatever forces were systematically destroying agricultural productivity throughout the region. The ghost farm investigation revealed layers of mystery that extended far beyond simple agricultural failure. The Dunton brothers had established themselves as intermediators in a complex scheme involving property acquisition, resource manipulation, and what appeared to be deliberate sabotage of competing agricultural operations. Their methods suggested coordination with outside interests that possessed both technical knowledge and financial resources exceeding anything available to local criminals. Cornelius's gold watch, a pre-war artifact of considerable sentimental value, had become entangled in these schemes through circumstances that illustrated how desperation could corrupt even the most principled individuals. The timepiece represented more than mere monetary value. It embodied family history, cultural continuity, and personal identity maintained despite the wasteland's corrosive influence on traditional values. The resolution of Modoc's crisis provided the party with their first taste of how complex problems could yield to persistent investigation and moral courage. But more importantly, It revealed how surface explanations often conceal deeper conspiracies, how local criminals frequently served as unwitting agents for more sophisticated operations, how individual communities' struggles connected to larger patterns of systematic manipulation and control. The journey south toward Vault City took the party through increasingly civilized territory with a new California. Republic's influence became more apparent with each passing mile. Road signs in multiple languages advertised goods and services available in settlements that had achieved genuine prosperity rather than mere survival. Caravans moved along, established routes with confidence that suggested effective law enforcement and stable political conditions. Vault City itself represented the pinnacle of post-war technological achievement, a community that had maintained pre-war standards of living through careful resource management and technological sophistication. The settlement's gleaming walls enclosed facilities that would have been impressive even by pre-war standards, with medical equipment, manufacturing capabilities, and infrastructure that seemed almost miraculous compared to the improvised solutions characterizing most wasteland communities. But Vault City's perfection came with costs that became apparent through interaction with its inhabitants. The rigid social hierarchy that separated citizens from servants from outsiders created a caste system that contradicted democratic ideals while ensuring social stability. The community's isolationist policies protected their advanced lifestyle at the expense of regional cooperation and mutual aid that might have benefited everyone. Dr. Troy's medical research provided the party's first concrete information about the GECK's true nature and capabilities. His technical knowledge revealed that Vault-Tech's Garden of Eden creation kit represented far more than agricultural equipment, incorporating terraforming technology that could reshape entire ecosystems given proper application. But his explanations also suggested that GECK deployment required specific conditions and technical expertise that might not be available in Arroyo's current circumstances. The Gecko settlement, located near Vault City but excluded from its prosperity, illustrated how technological advancement could coexist with deliberate neglect of neighboring communities. The ghouls who inhabited this settlement possessed technical skills and institutional knowledge that could have benefited everyone. Yet political prejudice and social discrimination kept them marginalized despite their obvious contributions to regional stability. The nuclear reactor powering Gecko's industrial facilities presented both opportunity and danger, its aging systems requiring constant maintenance to prevent catastrophic failure that would affect the entire region. The technical challenges involved in optimizing the reactor's performance while ensuring safety demonstrated how pre-war technology could serve post-war communities when properly understood and carefully maintained. Harold, the mutant mayor of Gecko, embodied the complex relationship between technological progress and biological adaptation that characterized much of post-war civilization. His unique physiology allowed him to survive radiation levels that would prove fatal to normal humans, while his accumulated experience provided insights into wasteland survival that spanned decades of direct observation and practical experimentation. Economic relationships between Vault City and Gecko revealed how prosperity could be maintained through exploitation of less fortunate neighbors. With advanced medical technology traded for raw materials and manual labor at exchange rates that perpetuated inequality rather than promoting mutual advancement. These arrangements suggested that even the most successful post-war communities relied on systemic injustice to maintain their elevated standards of living. Through conversations with various settlers and traders, the party began to assemble a more comprehensive understanding of regional politics and economics. The new California Republic's expansion northward brought democratic institutions and legal frameworks that provided stability and security, but also imposed taxation and regulation that some communities found burdensome. The Brotherhood of Steel maintained their technological monopoly through selective sharing of knowledge and equipment, ensuring their continued relevance while limiting widespread technological advancement. Yet beneath these familiar patterns of political and economic development, stranger currents continued to flow through regional affairs. Radio transmissions became more frequent and more sophisticated, carrying coded messages that suggested military coordination on scales that exceeded anything attributed to known factions. Trader gossip included increasing reports of unusual activities in coastal areas, of restrictions on maritime travel, of purchasing agents seeking specific types of genetic material and technical expertise. The party's growing reputation as effective problem solvers attracted attention from various sources, some welcome and others potentially dangerous. Their success in resolving local crises marked them as valuable assets for communities seeking solutions to complex problems, but also identified them as potential threats to interests that benefited from regional instability and conflict. As they prepared for the next stage of their journey, the Chosen One and their companions carried more than supplies and equipment. They bore growing knowledge of how surface problems connected to deeper conspiracies, how local solutions required understanding of regional patterns, how individual moral choices accumulated into historical consequences that could reshape entire civilizations. The Wasteland was revealing its secrets gradually, but each revelation raised new questions about the true nature of post-war society and the hidden forces that shaped its development. Section 7. Deeper Exploration. Part 1. 1500 to 1600 words. A wasteland south of Vault City gradually transformed from organized civilization into something wilder, more dangerous, yet paradoxically more honest in its brutality. Here, the pretense of civilized society gave way to naked survival, where communities formed around shared necessity rather than inherited privilege, where strength and cunning mattered more than bloodline or political connections. The landscape itself seemed to exhale the accumulated violence of decades, each rusted vehicle and collapsed building serving as a monument to humanity's capacity for both destruction and endurance. New Reno emerged from the desert like a fever. Dream of pre-war excess, its neon signs blazing with garish colors that could be seen for miles across the flat wasteland. The city pulsed with an energy that felt almost electric, powered not by generators, but by the raw human emotions of greed, lust, ambition, and desperation. This was what passed for urban sophistication in the post-nuclear world, a place where vice had been elevated to art form and moral compromise was considered a business strategy. The Mordino family's jet empire illustrated how quickly new technologies could reshape social structures when introduced without ethical constraints. Jet, the highly addictive stimulant that had spread throughout the wasteland like wildfire, represented more than just another recreational drug. Its chemical composition suggested sophisticated understanding of neuropharmacology, its production. Methods required access to specific precursor chemicals, and its distribution network operated with efficiency that implied centralized coordination and planning. Mrs. Mordino herself embodied the peculiar mixture of maternal warmth and ruthless calculation that characterized successful wasteland entrepreneurs. Her genuine affection for her son Lil Jesus coexisted with casual acceptance of the violence necessary to maintain their criminal empire. She spoke of family values while ordering executions, demonstrated hospitality while planning betrayals, showed kindness to individuals while systematically destroying entire communities through addiction. The right family represented a different approach to survival in New Reno's morally ambiguous environment, attempting to maintain traditional values while adapting to circumstances that seemed to reward exactly the opposite behavior. Orville Wright's anti-drug stance wasn't born from abstract moral principles, but from practical understanding of how addiction destroyed the social fabric that held Communities together during times of crisis dot the boxing matches at the jungle. Jim provided the chosen one with an opportunity to understand New Reno's power structures through direct participation rather than mere observation. Each opponent in the ring represented a different aspect of the city's character, from Stuart Little's technical precision to the masticator's raw brutality. These weren't just sporting contests, but ritualized expressions of the violence that underlay all social relationships in this environment. The Salvatore's laser weapon technology raised disturbing questions about the sources of advanced military equipment appearing throughout the Wasteland. Their pulse rifles displayed manufacturing quality that exceeded anything produced by known factions, incorporating power systems and targeting mechanisms that suggested access to pre-war military specifications and sophisticated production facilities. The weapons' serial numbers and component markings hinted at supply chains that remained carefully hidden from public observation. Through careful investigation and confiscation and strategic alliance building, patterns began to emerge that connected New Reno's criminal enterprises to larger regional developments. The city's various families weren't independent operators competing for local market share, but rather franchises in a more extensive network that coordinated activities across vast territories. Their conflicts served as cover for more sophisticated operations that required the appearance of chaos while maintaining underlying discipline and coordination. Bishop's political ambitions extended far beyond New Reno city limits, encompassing vision of regional influence that would have required support from sources possessing substantial resources and long-term strategic planning capabilities. His rhetoric about wasteland unification and economic development masked preparations for activities that seemed to anticipate significant changes in the region's political and social landscape. The chosen one's romantic entanglement with Bishop's daughter and wife created personal complications that illuminated the psychological costs of prolonged exposure to morally compromised environments. These relationships weren't simple matters of attraction or opportunity, but complex negotiations between competing loyalties, conflicting values, and the fundamental human need for connection in circumstances that punish trust and vulnerability. Cat's Paw magazine modeling session provided insight into how pre-war cultural artifacts continued to influence post-war society, with pornographic materials serving as more than entertainment, but as symbols of lost innocence and corrupted idealism. The photoshoot represented both personal degradation and cultural commentary, illustrating how desperate circumstances could transform anyone into willing participants in their own exploitation. But perhaps most significantly, New Reno's various criminal operations served as recruiting grounds for skills that would prove essential in the challenges ahead. The city's environment demanded adaptability, strategic thinking, and moral flexibility that, while personally costly, provided practical preparation for confronting enemies who operated without ethical constraints. Each compromise made here built psychological armor against more severe moral challenges that lay ahead. The nighttime conversations around campfires outside New Reno took on different character than those experienced in earlier settlements. Here, under stars barely visible through the city's light pollution, party members grappled with questions about the nature of civilization and barbarism, about whether survival justified any means, about how individuals could maintain personal integrity while operating within systematically corrupt environments. Sulik's spiritual perspective provided counterbalance to New Reno's corrosive cynicism, his animistic worldview recognizing the spiritual pollution that accompanied the city's material prosperity. His grampy bone consistently warned against prolonged exposure to environments where the spirits of place had been corrupted by human greed and violence. Yet even his traditional wisdom acknowledged that sometimes good people must venture into evil places to prevent greater evils from flourishing unchecked. Vic's technical expertise proved invaluable in understanding the sophisticated equipment and communication systems that various criminal organizations employed. His analysis of intercepted radio transmissions revealed coordination patterns that extended far beyond New Reno's immediate vicinity, suggesting command structures that operated according to military rather than criminal organizational principles. Party's departure from New Reno carried mixed emotions of relief and apprehension. Relief at escaping the city's morally toxic atmosphere, but apprehension about what their experiences there had revealed about the true nature of power in the post-war world. The criminals they had encountered weren't random thugs operating from desperation, but organized professionals, serving interests that remained carefully concealed behind multiple layers of misdirection and plausible denial. The road ahead led toward territories where the distinction between legitimate authority and criminal enterprise became even more blurred, where the evidence of systematic conspiracy grew stronger with each settlement encountered. The Wasteland's secrets were revealing themselves gradually, but each revelation carried implications that transformed their understanding of post-war society's true structure and the hidden forces that shaped its development. The journey northeast from New Reno carried the party through landscapes that seemed to embody the Wasteland's capacity for both natural beauty and human-made horror. Ancient mountains rose from the desert floor like sleeping giants, their peaks crowned with snow that remained pristine, despite the radioactive contamination that had poisoned so much of the surrounding territory. Between these natural monuments, valleys carved by long-dead rivers held secrets that spanned the entire history of post-nuclear civilization. Broken Hills announced itself through the distinctive purple glow that emanated from its uranium mining. Operations, a luminescence that painted the surrounding rocks with colors that would have been beautiful if they hadn't represented such deadly contamination. The settlement had grown around pre-war mining infrastructure, its inhabitants drawn by the economic opportunities that radioactive materials provided despite the obvious health risks associated with prolonged exposure to such intense radiation. Levels dot the broken hills represented more than just another mining town scraping survival from dangerous resources. This community had achieved something unprecedented in post-war society: the peaceful integration of humans, supermutants, and ghouls into a functioning social order based on mutual respect rather than fear or exploitation. The achievement was all the more remarkable given the violent history that had characterized relationships between these groups throughout the Wasteland. Marcus, the settlement's supermutant sheriff, embodied the philosophical complexity that had emerged from the Master's failed Unity campaign. His massive frame carried scars from countless battles fought during the war between supermutants and human settlements, yet his demeanor reflected thoughtful consideration rather than violent instinct. His appointment to law enforcement demonstrated how former enemies could become protectors when circumstances allowed wisdom to triumph over prejudice. The conversations with Marcus around evening campfires provided profound insights into the Master's vision and its ultimate failure. The supermutant leader hadn't been driven by simple conquest desires, but by genuine belief that biological unity could solve humanity's tendency toward self-destruction. The discovery that supermutants were sterile had shattered more than military strategy. It had destroyed a philosophical framework that offered hope for transcending the cycle of violence that had culminated in nuclear war. Marcus's stories of the Master's final moments revealed the tragic nobility of a being who had sacrificed his humanity in service of an ideal that proved scientifically impossible. The Master's decision to self-destruct when confronted with evidence of his followers' reproductive failure demonstrated intellectual honesty that contrasted sharply with the fanatical determination that had driven his military campaigns. In accepting defeat, the Master had shown more wisdom than many human leaders who refused to acknowledge their mistakes, even when confronted with overwhelming evidence. The uranium shortage affecting Broken Hill's mining operations revealed economic pressures that connected local resource extraction to larger industrial processes occurring beyond public observation. The demand for radioactive materials exceeded anything that could be explained by known settlements' energy needs or medical applications, suggesting hidden facilities that required substantial quantities of fissile material for purposes that remained carefully concealed from Wasteland inhabitants. Chad, the mining foreman whose bigotry threatened the settlement's delicate social balance, represented the psychological challenges that accompanied integration efforts throughout the post-war world. His hatred wasn't born from abstract ideology, but from personal trauma suffered during the super mutant campaigns, demonstrating how individual experiences of violence could perpetuate cycles of conflict long after their original causes had been resolved. The underground mining tunnels stretched for miles beneath the desert surface, their passages carved by pre-war equipment operated by workers who had never imagined their labor would one day sustain communities of mutated humans struggling to rebuild civilization from its radioactive ashes. The technical sophistication of the mining infrastructure suggested industrial capabilities that had survived the nuclear holocaust better than most civilian facilities. Francis, the super mutant bartender whose gentle nature contradicted every stereotype about his species, provided daily evidence that biological appearance bore little relationship to moral character or intellectual capacity. His philosophical discussions about identity, belonging, and the nature of consciousness challenged assumptions that even well-meaning humans maintained about the fundamental differences between species created by forced evolutionary virus exposure. Party's efforts to resolve Broken Hill's social and economic problems required diplomatic skills that went far beyond simple combat prowess or technical expertise. The solutions demanded understanding complex motivations, managing conflicting interests, and finding compromises that addressed legitimate concerns while maintaining the community's commitment to interspecies cooperation. Success in these endeavors provided valuable preparation for the larger diplomatic challenges that lay ahead. Zaius, the gorilla-like supermutant, whose intellectual pursuits included philosophy and literature, demonstrated how the Master's biological transformation had created beings capable of intellectual achievements that matched or exceeded baseline human capabilities. His library, assembled from salvaged books and carefully preserved manuscripts, represented cultural continuity that bridged pre-war knowledge with post-war wisdom. The nighttime conversations in Broken Hills took on special poignancy as party members grappled with questions about identity, belonging, and what constituted genuine humanity in a world where biological categories had been deliberately scrambled. The town's successful integration offered hope that peaceful coexistence was possible between groups that had been engineered for conflict, but also raised questions about why such cooperation remained so rare throughout the Wasteland. As strange radio transmissions that the Pip-Boy intercepted with increasing frequency seemed to originate from sources that possessed detailed knowledge of Broken Hill's operations and inhabitants. The coded messages discussed population genetics, radiation tolerance levels, and behavioral assessments that suggested systematic study of the settlement's unique social experiment by outside observers with sophisticated analytical capabilities. Professor, the settlement's ghoul mechanic, whose technical expertise kept the mining equipment operational, possessed knowledge that seemed to exceed what could be learned through post-war experience alone. His understanding of pre-war industrial processes and quality control procedures suggested access to technical documentation that had been preserved in locations unknown to most Wasteland inhabitants. His casual references to manufacturing specifications and engineering tolerances indicated familiarity with industrial standards that implied surviving institutional knowledge. The departure from Broken Hills carried emotional weight that reflected the deep friendships formed during the party's stay in the settlement. Marcus's decision to join their quest represented more than simple alliance. It demonstrated commitment to ideals that transcended species boundaries and personal safety considerations. His presence in the party would provide not just combat effectiveness, but moral authority that could influence how other communities perceived their mission. As the journey continued toward Redding, the mining town that controlled much of the region's gold production, the party carried new understanding of how post-war societies apparent chaos concealed complex social experiments and hidden observations that suggested coordination by forces operating beyond public awareness. The Wasteland secrets were revealing themselves through accumulated evidence rather than dramatic revelation, building toward conclusions that would challenge everything they believed about post-nuclear civilization's true structure and hidden powers that shaped its development across decades of apparent abandonment and neglect. The approach to Redding revealed a settlement that had grown wealthy from the Earth's bounty, yet remained perpetually on the edge of civil war due to competing claims on that same wealth. 3 major mining consortiums had established themselves around the town's rich gold deposits, each representing different approaches to post-war capitalism, and each willing to employ violence to protect their interests. The political tensions that simmered beneath Redding's prosperous surface reflected larger conflicts about how resources should be controlled in a world where traditional government authority had largely collapsed. The new California republics mining consortium represented democratic capitalism at its most organized, with shareholders, elected representatives, and legal frameworks that attempted to regulate extraction through civilized discourse rather than naked force. Their operations employed safety standards and environmental protections that reflected genuine concern for long-term sustainability, even when such considerations reduced immediate profits. Vault City's mining interests operated with the technical efficiency that characterized everything about that settlement, their equipment and methods displaying technological sophistication that far exceeded anything their competitors could match. But their success came at the cost of excluding local workers from employment opportunities, creating resentment that threatened to undermine the very stability their superior methods were designed to ensure. The Great Wanamingo Mine presented challenges that went far beyond simple labor disputes or resource allocation conflicts. The creatures that had infested the tunnels weren't native to North America, their biology suggesting origins that defied conventional understanding of post-war mutation patterns. These Wanamingos displayed intelligence that bordered on cunning, establishing territorial hierarchies and hunting strategies that required coordinated responses from experienced combatants. Working in perfect synchronization, the underground chambers where the Wanamingo Queen had established her nest stretched deep into the Earth's crust, their walls carved with precision that suggested either advanced burrowing capabilities or access to pre-war excavation equipment. The ecosystem that had developed around the alien creatures included smaller organisms that had never been cataloged by Wasteland naturalists, creating biological communities that seemed to operate according to entirely different evolutionary principles. The battle against the Wanamingo infestation required tactics that combined traditional combat skills with innovative problem-solving approaches. The creature's rapid reproductive cycle meant that conventional attrition strategies would fail unless the source of new generations could be eliminated permanently. The Queen's formidable defensive capabilities and the tactical support provided by her offspring created combat scenarios that tested every skill the party had developed during their journey through the Wasteland. But the successful resolution of Redding's mining crisis provided more than just economic benefits for the community. The political aftermath revealed how individual settlements, struggles connected to larger regional power dynamics that would shape California's future for generations to come. The party's role in determining which consortium gained control over the gold extraction carried implications that extended far beyond local employment and resource distribution. The journey south from Redding took the party through increasingly desolate territory where evidence of systematic depopulation became impossible to ignore. Abandoned homesteads showed signs of hasty evacuation rather than gradual abandonment, their former inhabitants having left behind personal possessions too valuable to discard during normal relocation circumstances. The patterns of abandonment suggested coordinated removal operations that had targeted specific demographic groups with disturbing precision. Vault 15's ruins provided the first concrete evidence that the party's quest might face challenges far more complex than simple equipment, failure, or natural disaster. The vault's condition suggested deliberate destruction rather than structural collapse, with explosive damage patterns that indicated military-grade demolitions expertise. The scattered debris included technological components that displayed manufacturing signatures matching equipment encountered in various settlements throughout their journey. The discovery that Vault 15 had served as the founding population source for both the new California Republic and the Khan Raider tribes illustrated how identical genetic and cultural backgrounds could produce dramatically different social outcomes depending on environmental pressures and leadership choices. This revelation carried profound implications for understanding human nature and the factors that determined whether communities would embrace cooperation or conflict as their primary survival strategy. But perhaps most disturbing were the personal effects scattered throughout Vault 15's wreckage that suggested its inhabitants had been removed rather than simply displaced by structural damage. Children's toys, family photographs, and medical records indicated that the vault's population had included multiple generations of families who had built their entire lives around the community's underground safety and technological comfort. Their sudden disappearance raised questions about who possessed the capability to relocate entire populations without attracting public attention. The radio transmissions intercepted near Vault 15's location carried technical specifications that matched the vault's original construction parameters, suggesting that whoever was broadcasting possessed detailed knowledge of Vault-Tech's engineering standards and operational procedures. The coded messages discussed population genetics, behavioral assessments, and relocation logistics that implied systematic study of vault populations by organizations with sophisticated analytical and logistical capabilities. The Abandoned Brotherhood of Steel bunker discovered during exploration of the area revealed evidence of hasty evacuation that contradicted everything known about that organization's strategic planning and disciplined withdrawal procedures. The technical equipment left behind included items too valuable to abandon during normal relocation circumstances, suggesting that their departure had been prompted by threats serious enough to override standard operational protocols. Computer terminals within the bunker contained partial files discussing advanced military technology that exceeded anything attributed to known factions throughout the Wasteland. The weapon specifications and tactical assessments described capabilities that seemed impossible given the region's apparent resource limitations and technological constraints. References to mainland operations and genetic purity assessments appeared throughout the corrupted data files with frequency that suggested systematic rather than incidental concerns. Marcus's reactions to the evidence discovered at Vault 15 reflected the deep unease that the party's accumulated discoveries were creating among all its members. His experience with the Masters Unity campaign had taught him to recognize signs of large-scale social engineering, and the patterns emerging from their investigation suggested operations that exceeded even the Master's ambitious schemes in scope and sophistication. Vic's technical analysis of the electronic equipment found throughout the abandoned facilities revealed manufacturing techniques that incorporated design elements unknown to existing Wasteland industrial capabilities. The circuitry displayed integration levels that required clean room environments and precision manufacturing equipment that should not have existed in the post-war world. Serial numbers and component markings suggested production runs that numbered in the thousands rather than the dozens that characterized most post-war manufacturing operations. Sulik's spiritual insights provided a different perspective on the disturbing discoveries. His animistic worldview, recognizing spiritual contamination, that accompanied places where great evil had been systematically planned and executed. His grampy bone consistently warned against prolonged exposure to areas where the natural balance had been corrupted by human activities that violated fundamental principles of harmony and respect for life. The campfire conversations following, these revelations carried weight that went beyond simple discussion of tactical options or logistical planning. The party members found themselves grappling with questions about the nature of civilization itself, about whether technological advancement inevitably led to moral corruption, about how individuals could maintain ethical principles while confronting enemies who operated without any such constraints. As they prepared for the next stage of their journey toward San Francisco and the coast, the Chosen One and their companions carried knowledge that transformed their understanding of the Wasteland's true nature. What they had initially perceived as post-apocalyptic chaos was revealing itself to be something far more sinister, a carefully constructed facade that concealed systematic operations by forces whose capabilities and intentions remained hidden, but whose influence extended throughout every aspect of post-war society. The Pacific coastline materialized through morning fog like the edge of the world itself, its vast expanse of irradiated water stretching toward horizons that had once connected California to Asian trading partners and military allies. The oceans. Surface displayed the peculiar luminescence that characterized heavily contaminated water bodies, its waves carrying radiation levels that made prolonged exposure dangerous even for wastelanders accustomed to environmental hazards. Yet beneath this poisoned beauty lay secrets that would reshape everything the party believed about post-war civilization's true structure. San Francisco emerged from the coastal mist as a testament to human adaptability and cultural preservation in the face of overwhelming destruction. The city's pre-war Chinese population had evolved into the Shi, a faction that had maintained technological sophistication and cultural identity through decades of isolation from the mainland's political developments. Their community represented successful adaptation that went beyond mere survival, achieving genuine prosperity through careful resource management and strategic technological innovation. Dr. Sheng's research laboratory contained equipment that would have been impressive even by pre-war standards, with genetic analysis capabilities and computer processing power that seemed impossible given the apparent collapse of industrial civilization. His work on human genetics revealed knowledge that extended far beyond anything available through post-war academic institutions, suggesting access to pre-war research databases that had been preserved through unknown means and carefully guarded from public access. The Emperor's Court, though dismissed by many outsiders as elaborate theater, demonstrated how traditional authority structures could provide stability and cultural continuity even when separated from their original political contexts. The Shi's success in maintaining social cohesion through ceremonial hierarchy illustrated alternatives to the democratic and militaristic approaches that dominated most other successful post-war communities. But it was the hubologists who provided the most disturbing insights into how pre-war institutions had adapted to post-nuclear circumstances through systematic exploitation of human psychological vulnerabilities. Their pseudo-scientific belief system combined legitimate therapeutic techniques with elaborate financial extraction schemes that targeted individuals seeking meaning and purpose in a world that seemed to offer neither. Oz-9, the supposed spacecraft that the hubologists believed would carry them to salvation among the stars, represented more than simple delusion or calculated fraud. The vehicle's technical specifications, while impossible for actual space travel, suggested access to advanced engineering knowledge and manufacturing capabilities that exceeded anything attributed to wasteland communities. The resources required for its construction implied funding sources that remained carefully concealed from public observation. Juan Cruz's leadership of the Hubologist movement demonstrated how charismatic authority could flourish in environments where traditional social structures had collapsed, creating new hierarchies based on promised transcendence rather than demonstrated competence. His ability to attract followers with advanced technical skills suggested psychological manipulation techniques that went beyond simple religious enthusiasm or shared desperation. The oil tanker moored in San Francisco's harbor represented a technological achievement that challenged everything the party had assumed about post-war transportation capabilities. The vessel's size and condition suggested maintenance activities that required sophisticated maritime engineering knowledge and access to specialized components that should not have existed in the Wasteland's apparent technological vacuum. Through careful investigation and diplomatic maneuvering, the party discovered that the tanker's fuel systems had been designed for a specific destination that didn't appear on any available maps, and navigational equipment included coordinates for locations far offshore where no known settlements or facilities were supposed to exist. The ship's communication arrays were configured to broadcast on frequencies that suggested coordination with installations possessing advanced technology and substantial power generation capabilities. Captain Aaron Myers, the vessel's commander, possessed maritime knowledge that seemed to encompass information about oceanic conditions, weather patterns, and navigational hazards that could only have been acquired through extensive sea travel during the post-war period. His casual references to offshore facilities and military installations contradicted everything known about California's coastal geography and strategic significance. The Shi's own investigations into unusual coastal activities had revealed evidence of systematic surveillance and resource extraction operations that extended far beyond anything that could be explained by known factions' capabilities or interests. Their intelligence reports described patrol vessels with technology that exceeded anything in the Brotherhood of Steel's arsenal, aircraft that operated according to flight patterns suggesting permanent base facilities, and communication intercepts that indicated coordination between multiple installations with sophisticated command structures. Computer terminals throughout San Francisco contained partial files that referenced genetic research programs with scope and duration that seemed impossible given the resource constraints that had limited all other post-war scientific endeavors. The research parameters discussed population genetics, radiation adaptation, and biological weapons development that suggested institutional knowledge preserved from pre-war government and military programs. The patterns emerging from accumulated evidence began to coalesce into a terrifying possibility that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nuclear war's aftermath and the nature of government continuity during the post-apocalyptic period. The technology, coordination, and resources displayed by these mysterious operations suggested that significant portions of the pre-war power structure had survived the Holocaust through means that remained carefully concealed from public knowledge. Marcus's experience with large-scale military operations provided context for interpreting the logistical indicators that were becoming impossible to ignore. The supply chains, communication networks, and personnel coordination suggested by the evidence exceeded anything he had witnessed during the Unity War, implying organizational capabilities that dwarfed even the Master's ambitious schemes for biological unification. Vic's technical expertise revealed that much of the advanced equipment encountered throughout their journey shared design elements and manufacturing signatures that suggested common sources despite being discovered in widely separated locations. The standardization implied centralized production facilities with quality control procedures that required substantial industrial infrastructure and skilled technical personnel. Sulik's spiritual sensitivity detected malevolent influences that seemed to emanate from offshore directions, his grampy bone consistently indicating dangerous forces that operated beyond the natural world's normal boundaries. His traditional worldview recognized patterns of systematic evil that violated fundamental principles governing the relationship between human communities and the natural environment that sustained them. The radio transmissions intercepted along the coast carried increasingly sophisticated content that included tactical assessments, population surveys, and strategic planning discussions that clearly indicated preparation for large-scale military operations. The technical terminology and organizational procedures suggested professional military planning that incorporated lessons learned from the Great War, while adapting to post-nuclear environmental and political conditions. Dr. Wong's research into radiation-induced mutations revealed biological data that seemed to encompass information about genetic changes occurring throughout the Wasteland's population, suggesting systematic study that required coordinated data collection from multiple sources over extended time periods. The scope of the research implied surveillance capabilities that extended throughout the region despite the apparent absence of centralized authority structures. The departure from San Francisco carried implications that went far beyond simple continuation of their quest for Vault 13 and the GECK technology needed to save Arroyo. The party now understood that their journey was occurring within a larger context of systematic operations that threatened not just their village, but potentially every community that had developed during the post-war recovery period. The tankers. Engines rumbled to life with power that seemed to vibrate through the ocean itself, their diesel systems consuming fuel that burned with efficiency, suggesting advanced refining processes and chemical additives that exceeded Wasteland manufacturing capabilities. As the vessel departed San Francisco's harbor, carrying the party toward destinations that officially didn't exist, the full scope of their mission began to reveal itself through accumulated evidence that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence or misinterpretation. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly ahead, its radioactive waters concealing secrets that would determine whether post-war civilization would be allowed to develop according to its own values and priorities, or whether it would be reshaped according to visions conceived by powers that had never accepted the nuclear holocaust as anything more than a temporary setback in their pursuit of absolute control over human biological and social evolution. The journey to Vault 13 through increasingly treacherous wasteland terrain carried the party toward revelations that would shatter their remaining illusions about the post-war world's apparent recovery and the forces that had shaped its development over 8 decades of supposed abandonment. The landscape itself seemed to mourn as they traveled, with radiation storms that painted the sky in unnatural colors and mutated plant life that suggested environmental manipulation rather than natural adaptation to nuclear contamination. Vault's exterior revealed signs of recent activity that contradicted its supposed abandonment decades earlier. Fresh tire tracks, discarded equipment, and construction materials indicated large-scale operations that required substantial personnel and logistical support. The blast doors showed evidence of forced entry using cutting tools that exceeded anything available to wasteland scavengers, suggesting military-grade equipment operated by trained professionals rather than opportunistic raiders. But the most shocking discovery awaited within the vault itself, where the familiar architecture of vault-tech engineering contained horrors that challenged every assumption about human decency and scientific ethics. The living areas that should have housed Arroyo's missing villagers instead contained evidence of systematic experimentation that reduced human beings to laboratory specimens in pursuit of genetic research that served purposes too terrible to contemplate. The Deathclaws that inhabited Vault 13's deeper levels weren't the savage predators that terrorized wasteland travelers, but intelligent beings capable of complex communication and philosophical reasoning. Their transformation from mindless killing machines into thinking creatures represented scientific achievement that demonstrated technological capabilities far exceeding anything attributed to known factions throughout the post-war period. Gruther, a pack leader whose intelligence had been enhanced through genetic manipulation, possessed cognitive abilities that allowed sophisticated analysis of human behavior, political systems, and moral philosophy. His conversations with the party revealed perspectives on consciousness, identity, and the nature of humanity that challenged fundamental assumptions about what distinguished sentient beings from mere animals. The Deathclaw community had developed social structures, cultural practices, and intellectual pursuits that demonstrated genuine civilization despite their fearsome appearance and predatory biology. Their artistic expressions, though crude by human standards, reflected creative impulses that suggested emotional depth and aesthetic sensibility that contradicted everything previously believed about their species' psychological limitations. But perhaps most disturbing was the evidence suggesting that the Deathclaw intelligence enhancement represented only one component of a comprehensive biological research program that encompassed genetic manipulation on scales that dwarf even the most ambitious pre-war scientific endeavors. Computer terminals throughout the vault contained partial files discussing forced evolutionary virus applications, radiation exposure experiments, and systematic breeding programs that treated sentient beings as raw material for creating new forms of life. The missing Arroyo villagers had been transported to facilities that official records claimed didn't exist, their removal orchestrated by organizations with capabilities that included advanced transportation systems, sophisticated intelligence networks, and logistical coordination that spanned vast geographical areas. The precision of the operation suggested planning that had anticipated their quest long before the Chosen One had departed from tribal lands. Dr. Schreiber's research notes, scattered throughout the vault's scientific facilities, revealed the true scope of the genetic research programs that had been conducted using unwilling human subjects, drawn from communities throughout the Wasteland. His work encompassed projects that sought to identify genetic markers associated with radiation resistance, immune system adaptability, and reproductive viability in contaminated environments. The research parameters indicated systematic study of human genetic diversity that required sample populations drawn from multiple ethnic backgrounds, geographical regions, and exposure histories. The scope suggested data collection activities that had been ongoing for decades, encompassing surveillance and specimen acquisition that extended throughout North America and possibly beyond. Marcus's horror at discovering the vault's contents reflected his understanding of how scientific research could be perverted to serve ideological purposes that reduced living beings to experimental subjects. His experience with the Master's biological transformation programs provided context for recognizing the systematic nature of the atrocities that had been committed within Vault 13's sterile corridors. The weapons cache discovered in the vault's security section contained equipment that displayed manufacturing quality and technological sophistication that exceeded anything previously encountered during their journey. Pulse rifles, plasma weapons, and energy cells suggested industrial capabilities that required substantial infrastructure and skilled personnel operating according to military standards and quality control procedures. Vic's analysis of the communication equipment revealed that Vault 13 had served as a coordination center for activities that encompassed the entire western coastline, with encrypted transmissions linking the facility to installations whose locations remained classified, but whose operational tempo suggested significant ongoing activities. The technical specifications indicated communication ranges that exceeded anything possible with Wasteland technology. Sulik's spiritual distress intensified as he explored the vault's experimental areas, his animistic worldview recognizing the spiritual contamination that accompanied places where natural order had been systematically violated through scientific hubris. His traditional healing knowledge proved inadequate for addressing the psychological trauma experienced by visiting locations where such fundamental violations of sacred principles had been methodically implemented. The Deathclaw mother, whose maternal instincts had survived genetic manipulation designed to enhance aggression and predatory efficiency, demonstrated how biological engineering could produce unintended consequences that complicated the researcher's objectives. Her protective behavior toward her offspring revealed emotional depth that challenged assumptions about the relationship between intelligence enhancement and psychological development. The Vault's library contained technical manuals and research protocols that described genetic engineering techniques, behavioral modification procedures, and biological weapons development that seemed impossible given the apparent collapse of pre-war scientific institutions. The knowledge preserved within these documents suggested continuity of research programs that had survived the nuclear holocaust through means that remained carefully concealed from public observation. Computer simulations running on the vaults. Mainframe systems modeled population genetics scenarios that encompassed the entire North American continent, with demographic projections that assumed systematic intervention in human reproductive patterns over multiple generations. The models incorporated variables that included radiation exposure, genetic drift, and selective breeding programs that treated human populations as livestock to be improved through scientific management. The party's conversations with the intelligent. Deathclaws revealed information about other facilities where similar experiments had been conducted, using different species and research parameters. Their descriptions suggested a network of installations that spanned vast geographical areas, each specializing in different aspects of biological research while sharing data and coordinating activities through sophisticated communication systems. The evidence accumulated within Vault 13 painted a picture of systematic operations that had continued throughout the post-war period, despite the apparent collapse of governmental authority and scientific institutions. The scope and coordination required for such activities implied organizational continuity that had survived the nuclear holocaust while remaining hidden from the communities that had struggled to rebuild civilization from its radioactive ruins. Goris, the albino Deathclaw, whose scholarly pursuits included philosophy and literature, provided insights into how intelligence enhancement had affected his species' understanding of their place in the post-war world. His ability to analyze complex ethical dilemmas and articulate sophisticated arguments demonstrated cognitive capabilities that exceeded those of many humans. Yet his physical appearance ensured that most Wastelanders would attack him on sight. Rather than engage in meaningful dialogue, the Vault's medical facilities contained research data that suggested systematic study of human genetic variations across multiple generations, with particular attention to families and bloodlines that had demonstrated unusual resistance to radiation exposure or genetic stability in contaminated environments. The Arroyo villagers' capture appeared to be part of this larger research program, their tribal heritage making them valuable subjects for studying how isolated populations had adapted to post-nuclear conditions. As evening approached and the party prepared to make camp within Vault 13's relatively secure confines, their conversations around the salvaged furniture that served as makeshift seating took on profound gravity that reflected the weight of their discoveries. They had entered the vault seeking missing friends and family members, but had instead uncovered evidence of systematic crimes against humanity that dwarfed anything they had previously imagined possible. The intelligent Deathclaw's philosophical discussions about the nature of consciousness and identity provided counterpoint to the horror of the experimental evidence, demonstrating how even the most extreme biological manipulation could not entirely suppress the fundamental qualities that defined sentient life. Their questions about their own nature and purpose reflected struggles with identity that resonated with anyone who had ever questioned their place in an incomprehensible universe. The party's departure from Vault 13 would carry them toward confrontations That would test everything they had learned about survival, morality, and the price of freedom in a world where hidden powers treated all life as raw material for their twisted visions of genetic perfection. The GECK technology they sought had become secondary to the larger mission of exposing and stopping the systematic atrocities that threatened every community that had dared to rebuild. The journey from Vault 13 toward the mysterious coastal installations required passage through territories that seemed deliberately designed to discourage exploration, with radiation levels that exceeded anything previously encountered and environmental hazards that suggested systematic contamination rather than natural post-war decay. The party's Geiger counters clicked with increasing frequency as they approached areas that official maps showed as empty ocean, yet clearly contained facilities significant enough to warrant such extensive protective measures. Navarro Military Base materialized from the coastal fog like a fortress from another era, its architecture displaying clean lines and advanced construction techniques that contrasted sharply with the improvised structures characterizing most post-war settlements. The base's perimeter defenses incorporated energy weapon systems, automated turrets, and sensor networks that demonstrated technological sophistication exceeding anything attributed to known factions throughout the wasteland. The soldiers patrolling Navarro's grounds moved with precision and discipline that reflected professional military training rather than the rough competence that characterized most wasteland fighters. Their equipment displayed standardization and maintenance quality that suggested access to manufacturing facilities, spare parts, and technical support that should not have existed in the apparent post-apocalyptic environment. The power armor worn by the base's elite troops represented technological achievement that dwarfed even the Brotherhood of Steel's most advanced equipment. The T-51B and advanced power armor suits demonstrated manufacturing capabilities that required sophisticated industrial infrastructure, rare materials, and engineering expertise that implied continuity of pre-war military research and development programs. Sergeant Archdornan's legendary disciplinary sessions became infamous among the base's personnel, his demands for military precision and protocol adherence, reflecting institutional standards that had remained unchanged despite the nuclear holocaust's apparent disruption of governmental authority. His training methods emphasized loyalty to chain of command and mission objectives that transcended individual survival concerns or personal moral considerations. The vertibird aircraft stationed at Navarro displayed engineering sophistication that exceeded anything previously encountered in the post-war world, with vertical takeoff capabilities, long-range flight systems, and weapon integration that suggested decades of continued research and development by organizations with substantial resources and technical expertise. The maintenance facilities required to keep such advanced aircraft operational implied industrial capabilities that contradicted everything known about technological regression following the Great War. Through careful infiltration and strategic impersonation, the party gained access to classified information that revealed the true scope of the operations being coordinated from Navarro. The base served as a mainland logistics center for activities that encompassed the entire western coastline, with supply chains, personnel rotation schedules, and mission parameters that indicated systematic rather than improvised military planning. The communications center processed encrypted transmissions that linked Navarro to installations throughout North America and beyond, their technical sophistication requiring satellite networks, relay stations, and signal processing capabilities. That seemed impossible given the apparent collapse of pre-war communication infrastructure. The message traffic included operational reports, strategic assessments, and logistical requirements that painted a picture of coordinated activities on continental scales. Dr. Curling's research laboratory contained equipment and specimens that revealed the true purpose of the genetic research programs discovered at Vault 13. His work focused on developing biological weapons that would target specific genetic markers, creating pathogens that could eliminate entire population groups while leaving others unaffected. The implications of such research went far beyond military applications, suggesting plans for systematic genocide disguised as scientific advancement. The FEV curling 13 strain represented the culmination of decades of biological weapons, research that had continued throughout the post-war period, despite international treaties and moral prohibitions that should have prevented such activities. The pathogen's design parameters included airborne transmission, rapid lethality, and genetic selectivity that would allow precise targeting of populations based on radiation, exposure history, and genetic mutations. Computer terminals throughout. The base contained personnel files and mission briefings that revealed the organizational structure of the forces operating from Navarro. The Enclave, as they called themselves, claimed direct descent from the pre-war United States government, asserting legitimacy that justified their treatment of mainland populations as foreign enemies rather than fellow Americans deserving constitutional protection. The Enclave's ideology combined patriotic rhetoric with racial purity doctrines that reduced complex genetic science to crude prejudice against anyone whose DNA had been affected by radiation exposure. Their definition of pure strain human excluded virtually everyone who had survived the nuclear holocaust through adaptation to contaminated environments, creating justification for treating wasteland communities as expendable test subjects rather than citizens deserving protection. The base's weapons development programs included energy weapons, plasma technology, and powered armor systems that demonstrated continuous advancement of pre-war military technology through decades of secret research and development. The technical specifications exceeded anything previously encountered, suggesting access to resources, personnel, and facilities that had been carefully hidden from public knowledge throughout the post-war recovery period. Frank Horrigan's reputation as the Enclave's ultimate weapon preceded his actual appearance at Navarro, with stories of his combat effectiveness and unwavering loyalty, creating legends that inspired both fear and admiration among the base's personnel. His transformation from human soldier to cybernetic super mutant represented the ultimate irony of an organization dedicated to genetic purity yet willing to employ the most extreme biological modifications to achieve their objectives. The secret service protocols that governed Horrigan's deployment reflected organizational paranoia that extended throughout the Enclave's command structure, with security measures that assumed infiltration attempts, internal betrayal, and systematic opposition from forces capable of sophisticated intelligence operations. These precautions suggested awareness that their activities had attracted attention from groups with capabilities approaching their own. The party's infiltration of Navarro required moral compromises that tested their commitment to ethical principles, while providing essential intelligence about the Enclave's ultimate objectives. The uniforms and identification documents necessary for maintaining their cover forced them to impersonate soldiers serving an organization dedicated to genocide, creating psychological stress that challenged their sense of personal integrity. The base's personnel included individuals who genuinely believed in the Enclave's mission, while others served out of fear, habit, or lack of alternatives rather than ideological commitment. These variations in motivation created opportunities for subversion and intelligence gathering, but also demonstrated how systematic evil could flourish through institutional momentum rather than universal malevolence. The Vertibird flight training programs prepared pilots for missions that extended far beyond California's coastline, with navigation protocols, fuel calculations, and communication procedures that indicated regular flights to installations in other regions of North America. The scope of operations suggested a network of facilities that had maintained coordination throughout the post-war period despite the apparent collapse of federal authority. The maintenance logs for the base's equipment revealed supply chains that included components manufactured at facilities whose locations remained classified, but whose production capabilities suggested industrial infrastructure that contradicted everything known about post-war economic collapse. The standardization of parts and procedures indicated centralized planning and quality control that required substantial organizational resources. As the party prepared for their final infiltration of the Enclave's primary installation, they carried knowledge that transformed their understanding of the post-war world's true nature. What they had initially perceived as recovery from nuclear devastation was revealing itself as a carefully orchestrated period of observation and experimentation by forces that had never accepted the Holocaust as anything more than a temporary interruption in their pursuit of absolute power over human biological and social evolution. The oil rig that served as the Enclave's headquarters represented more than a military installation. It embodied an alternative vision of American civilization that had developed in isolation from the mainland struggles, creating a society dedicated to genetic purity and technological supremacy, regardless of the cost in human suffering. The final confrontation would determine whether the Wasteland's communities would be allowed to determine their own future, or whether they would be reshaped according to visions that reduced them to raw material for creating a master race worthy of inheriting the earth from its irradiated ruins. The vertibird flight toward the oil rig carried the party across endless expanses of irradiated ocean that stretched toward horizons where the boundary between contaminated water and poisoned sky became indistinguishable. The aircraft's sophisticated navigation systems guided them through atmospheric conditions that would have been impossible to traverse using pre-war technology, their route carefully calculated to avoid detection by surface vessels and monitoring. Stations that remained hidden beneath the waves. Control Station ENCLAVE rose from the Pacific's toxic waters, like a monument to humanity's capacity for both technological achievement and moral failure. The massive offshore platform displayed engineering sophistication that exceeded anything constructed during the pre-war period, its superstructure incorporating advanced materials, power generation systems, and environmental controls that created a self-contained civilization isolated from the mainland's contaminated reality. The oil rig's exterior defenses included automated weapon systems, energy shields, and detection networks that could have repelled conventional military assault by any known faction throughout the post-war world. The technological superiority demonstrated by these installations reflected decades of continued research and development that had proceeded without the resource constraints or ethical oversight that limited other communities' advancement. President Dick Richardson's office occupied the platform's highest levels, its windows providing panoramic views of the Pacific Ocean that served as both strategic advantage and symbolic representation of the Enclave's separation from mainland concerns. The chamber's furnishings combined pre-war elegance with post-war functionality, creating an environment that suggested continuity of governmental authority despite the nuclear Holocaust's apparent disruption of constitutional order. Richardson himself embodied the peculiar mixture of patriotic idealism and genocidal pragmatism that characterized the Enclave's leadership throughout their decades of isolation from mainland society. His speeches combined references to American values with casual discussion of biological weapons deployment, demonstrating how institutional insularity could corrupt even the most noble intentions through gradual moral compromise and ideological extremism. The president's exposition revealed the full scope of the Enclave's plans for mainland population elimination, with detailed projections of casualty rates, genetic impact assessments, and reconstruction timelines that treated human beings as statistical abstractions rather than individuals deserving constitutional protection. The FEV curling 13 pathogen would be delivered through atmospheric dispersal systems that ensured comprehensive coverage of all inhabited areas throughout North America. The genetic criteria used to determine survival worthiness excluded virtually everyone who had adapted to post-war environmental conditions, creating definitions of humanity that would have eliminated even many pre-war populations based on ancestry, medical history, and geographical origin. The Enclave's concept of genetic purity reflected pseudoscientific prejudices rather than legitimate biological research, reducing complex genetic science to crude racial ideology. Dr. Charles Curling's research facilities contained specimens and data that documented systematic study of mainland populations over decades of surveillance and specimen collection. His biological weapons development had proceeded through testing phases that included deliberate exposure of unwilling subjects to experimental pathogens, creating human suffering on scales that dwarf even the master's biological transformation. Programs. The computer systems throughout the oil rig processed information about mainland communities that could only have been gathered through comprehensive surveillance networks operating throughout the post-war period. The intelligence files included detailed demographic assessments, resource inventories, and strategic analyses that treated entire settlements as potential targets for elimination or resource extraction. The Enclave's military forces included personnel drawn from families that had maintained genetic isolation throughout the post-war period, creating a population that viewed mainland inhabitants as foreign enemies rather than fellow Americans deserving protection. Their training emphasized loyalty to abstract principles rather than humanitarian concerns, fostering institutional culture that could implement genocide while maintaining professional discipline. Frank Horrigan's presence on the oil rig represented the ultimate contradiction inherent in the Enclave's ideology, as their most effective soldier had been transformed through the same biological processes that they condemned in mainland populations. His cybernetic enhancements and super mutant physiology demonstrated technological capabilities that exceeded anything previously encountered, yet his unwavering loyalty to the organization's mission showed how systematic indoctrination could override even the most obvious logical contradictions. The discovery of Arroyos, captured villagers within the oil rig's detention facilities, revealed the personal stakes involved in stopping the Enclave's genocidal plans. These weren't abstract victims of distant atrocities, but friends and family members, whose suffering provided emotional motivation that complemented the moral imperatives driving the party's mission. Their condition reflected systematic abuse that had reduced them to experimental subjects in service of research programs that treated human dignity as irrelevant to scientific advancement. The Enclave's historical records documented their survival during the nuclear holocaust through advanced warning systems and protected facilities that had been prepared long before the Great War's outbreak. Their isolation hadn't been accidental, but deliberately planned, creating conditions that allowed them to observe mainland recovery while maintaining the technological and organizational advantages necessary for reasserting control when circumstances became favorable. The oil rig's production facilities manufactured equipment, weapons, and vehicles that demonstrated industrial capabilities exceeding anything achieved by mainland communities throughout the post-war recovery period. The standardization and quality control procedures reflected institutional continuity that had preserved pre-war engineering knowledge while advancing beyond anything achieved before the nuclear holocaust. The party's confrontation with President Richardson revealed the psychological mechanisms that had allowed the Enclave's leadership to rationalize genocide as patriotic duty. His genuine belief in American values coexisted with casual acceptance of continental extermination, demonstrating how institutional isolation could corrupt moral reasoning while preserving superficial commitment to noble principles. The president's death marked a turning point that transformed the party's mission from intelligence gathering to active sabotage of systems designed to implement genocide on unprecedented scales. The oil rig's security protocols activated automatically, creating combat scenarios that tested every skill developed during their journey through the Wasteland, while forcing them to operate under time constraints that prevented careful planning or tactical preparation. The reactor overload sequence required technical expertise that combined Vic's mechanical knowledge with the party's combat effectiveness and strategic thinking abilities. The nuclear systems powering the oil rig incorporated safety features and containment, procedures that reflected decades of advanced engineering, yet their complexity created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by individuals with sufficient determination and technical understanding. The escape from Control Station ENCLAVE carried symbolic significance that went beyond simple survival, as the platform's destruction represented the elimination of institutional structures that had perpetuated pre-war governmental authority through methods that contradicted every principle that authority claimed to represent. The explosion that consumed the facility marked the end of an organization that had survived the nuclear holocaust, only to become a greater threat to human survival than the original war itself. Frank Horrigan's final confrontation embodied the ultimate test of everything the party had learned about courage, sacrifice, and moral commitment during their journey through the wasteland's dangers and temptations. His combat effectiveness reflected technological enhancement that exceeded human limitations. Yet his defeat demonstrated that institutional power could be overcome through individual determination, combined with collaborative effort and strategic thinking. The oil rig's final moments provided reflection on the nature of patriotism, progress, and the relationship between technological advancement and moral development. The Enclave's destruction eliminated an immediate threat to wasteland communities, but the knowledge they had preserved and the technologies they had developed would continue to influence post-war civilization's development for generations to come. As the party escaped the collapsing facility aboard their commandeered vertibird, they carried more than just the rescued Arroyo villagers and the GECK technology needed to save their home community. They bore witness to humanity's capacity for both ultimate evil and redemptive heroism, having confronted institutional power that claimed legitimacy through historical continuity, while implementing policies that betrayed every value such continuity was supposed to preserve. The return journey to Arroyo aboard the captured vertibird carried profound significance that extended far beyond simple transportation, as the aircraft itself represented technology that would have been impossible for wasteland communities to develop independently. It now served to deliver salvation to the very people the Enclave had planned to exterminate. The flight path took them over territories they had traversed on foot during their quest, providing aerial perspective on the interconnected nature of the communities they had unknowingly been targeted for. Systematic elimination. The rescued Arroyo villagers occupied the vertibird's passenger compartment with mixture of relief and trauma that reflected their experiences as unwilling subjects in the Enclave's genetic research programs. Their physical condition showed evidence of medical procedures that had treated them as laboratory specimens rather than human beings. Yet their survival demonstrated resilience that characterized the wasteland's most admirable qualities throughout the post-war recovery period. The GECK technology carried in the aircraft's cargo bay represented more than agricultural equipment or terraforming capabilities. It embodied the principle that communities should determine their own biological and social future without interference from forces that claimed authority through historical legitimacy rather than democratic consent. The device's proper deployment would require understanding that went beyond technical specifications to encompass wisdom about sustainable development and environmental stewardship. Marcus's reflections during the flight revealed how his experiences during the quest had transformed his understanding of leadership, sacrifice, and the relationship between individual moral choices and collective historical consequences. His decision to accompany the Chosen One had begun as personal quest for meaning following the Master's defeat, but had evolved into commitment to protecting vulnerable communities from systematic exploitation by technologically superior forces. Vic's technical analysis of the Enclave's equipment provided insights into industrial capabilities that suggested other installations might have survived the oil rig's destruction, creating ongoing security concerns that would require vigilance from wasteland communities throughout the recovery period. The technological knowledge preserved by the enclave represented both opportunity for advancement and potential threat if it fell into hands of individuals lacking moral constraints or democratic accountability. Sulik's spiritual interpretation of their victory emphasized the restoration of natural balance that had been threatened by the enclave's attempts to reshape human evolution according to artificial criteria that ignored the sacred relationships connecting all forms of life. His Grampy Bone had consistently warned against the spiritual contamination associated with the enclave's activities, recognizing dangers that transcended immediate physical threats to encompass fundamental violations of cosmic harmony. The approach to Arroyo revealed landscape transformation that demonstrated the GECK's remarkable terraforming capabilities, with green vegetation replacing the brown wasteland that had threatened the village's survival when the Chosen One had first departed on their quest. The technological intervention had succeeded in ways that exceeded even the most optimistic projections, creating agricultural productivity that would sustain the community for generations to come. The elders' reaction to the party's return combined profound relief with deep sorrow for the prices that had been paid to secure Arroyo's salvation. Her wisdom encompassed understanding that individual heroism could address immediate crises, while larger problems required institutional changes that would take decades to implement effectively. The village's survival created opportunities for cultural preservation and economic development that honored their tribal heritage while adapting to post-war realities. The integration of rescued villagers back into Arroyo's social structure required careful attention to psychological trauma that resulted from their experiences as enclave prisoners. The community's traditional healing practices proved inadequate for addressing wounds that went beyond physical injury to encompass fundamental violations of human dignity and personal autonomy. New approaches would be needed that combine tribal wisdom with modern understanding of psychological recovery. The GECK's deployment created environmental changes that extended far beyond Arroyo's immediate vicinity, with ecological restoration effects that benefited neighboring communities and wildlife populations throughout the region. The terraforming technology represented hope for reversing environmental damage caused by the nuclear holocaust. Yet its power also created responsibilities for ensuring such capabilities would be used wisely rather than exploited for political or economic advantage. The celebration of the party's return provided opportunity for reflection on the nature of heroism, sacrifice, and community values that had sustained Arroyo through its darkest period. The tribal traditions that emphasized collective responsibility and environmental stewardship offered alternatives to the individualistic competition and technological dominance that had characterized both pre-war American society and the enclave's post-war continuation of those values. The companions who had shared the quest began to consider their future paths now that their primary mission had been accomplished successfully. Marcus expressed interest in using his leadership experience to help other communities achieve the kind of interspecies cooperation that had made Broken Hills a model for post-war social development. His presence would provide both practical security and symbolic representation of possibilities for peaceful coexistence. Vic's decision to establish permanent trading relationships between Arroyo and other settlements reflected economic thinking that emphasized mutual benefit rather than exploitative relationships. His technical expertise and knowledge of regional trade networks would help ensure that Arroyo's newfound prosperity would be shared with neighboring communities, rather than creating inequalities that might generate conflict or resentment. Sulik's choice to remain with the tribal community represented commitment to preserving cultural traditions that had sustained his people through the post-war period, while adapting those practices to accommodate new realities created by technological advancement and increased contact with outside communities. His spiritual leadership would provide essential guidance for maintaining balance between tradition and innovation. The broader implications of the Enclave's defeat resonated throughout the Wasteland as news of their existence and elimination spread through traitor networks, radio communications, and personal testimony from those who had participated in or witnessed the final confrontation. The revelation that pre-war governmental authority had survived the nuclear holocaust while planning continental genocide created profound changes in how Wasteland communities understood their relationship to American political traditions. New California Republic's response to learning about the Enclave's activities included increased security measures, expanded intelligence operations, and diplomatic initiatives designed to coordinate regional defense against future threats from technologically superior forces. The democratic values that characterized NCR governance provided framework for addressing security concerns without sacrificing civil liberties or constitutional principles that distinguished legitimate authority from authoritarian control. Brotherhood of Steel's reaction encompassed both vindication of their technological preservation mission and concern about implications of the Enclave's advanced capabilities for regional power balances. Their monopolistic approach to technology control would require reevaluation in light of evidence that other organizations had maintained industrial capabilities throughout the post-war period while operating beyond public knowledge or democratic oversight. The intelligent Deathclaw survival created ongoing questions about rights, citizenship, and species equality that would challenge traditional assumptions about humanity's relationship to other forms of sentient life. Their philosophical sophistication and cultural development demanded recognition as legitimate members of post-war society, deserving protection under whatever constitutional framework eventually emerged from the Wasteland's political evolution. As the immediate celebration of victory gave way to long-term planning for Arroyo's future development, the Chosen One faced choices about personal destiny that reflected larger questions about leadership, responsibility, and the relationship between individual achievement and collective welfare. The skills developed during the quest had prepared them for roles that transcended tribal boundaries, while the values learned from their community provided moral foundation for addressing challenges that would continue to emerge as post-war civilization evolved toward greater complexity and interconnection. The legacy of their journey would extend far beyond Arroyo's salvation to encompass principles of resistance against systematic oppression, cooperation across species and cultural boundaries, and commitment to democratic values that respected individual dignity while promoting collective welfare. The Wasteland's recovery would continue through the efforts of communities that had learned to balance technological advancement with moral development, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated by future generations. The morning sun rose over Arroyo with a gentleness that seemed to acknowledge the tremendous journey that had brought their community back from the brink of extinction. Golden light filtered through leaves that had grown thick and vibrant since the GECK's deployment, casting dancing shadows on pathways where children now played games that their grandparents had taught them in the days before drought and desperation had threatened to end their tribal legacy forever. The transformation of the landscape bore witness to technology's capacity for healing rather than destruction, with irrigation channels that sparkled with clean water flowing toward fields where corn stalks reached toward the sky with the vigor that had once characterized this valley in the earliest days of settlement. The desert's harsh browns and yellows had given way to the greens and golds of agricultural abundance that would sustain not just Arroyo, but neighboring communities that had struggled with their own resource shortages throughout the long recovery period. In the center of the village, the elder sat on her traditional woven mat, her aged hands working slowly through the process of preparing healing herbs that would help the rescued villagers recover from their traumatic experiences as enclave prisoners. Her movements carried the rhythmic patience of someone who had witnessed both the worst and best of human nature, who understood that healing required time measured, not in days or weeks, but in the gradual restoration of trust and hope. The elders' eyes reflected wisdom earned through decades of leadership that had guided Arroyo through challenges ranging from natural disasters to resource scarcity to the ultimate threat of systematic genocide by forces that claimed legitimacy through historical authority while betraying every value such authority was supposed to represent. Her survival represented continuity that connected the present moment to the vault dweller's original vision of a community that would preserve the best aspects of both pre-war knowledge and post-war adaptation. Around evening cooking fires that burned with wood gathered from trees that had flourished since the GECK's environmental restoration. Families shared stories that wove together personal experiences with collective memory, creating narratives that would ensure future generations understood both the prices paid for their security and the values that had made such sacrifices worthwhile. These weren't just entertainment, but cultural preservation that maintained identity while acknowledging change. The children who played in Arroyo's restored gardens represented hope that extended far beyond their individual futures to encompass possibilities for post-war civilization that had seemed impossible during the darkest periods of the recovery. Their laughter echoed through streets where despair had once threatened to overwhelm even the most determined efforts to maintain community. Cohesion and cultural traditions. Marcus had established himself as a bridge between Arroyo's tribal traditions and the broader Wasteland community, his presence serving as living proof that cooperation across species boundaries could create strength rather than vulnerability. His philosophical discussions with the villages, young people challenged them to think beyond traditional categories, while respecting the wisdom that had sustained their ancestors through impossible circumstances. Vic's trading post at the villages edge bustled with activity that connected Arroyo to regional economic networks that operated according to principles of mutual benefit rather than exploitative relationships. His technical expertise had proven invaluable for maintaining the sophisticated equipment that the GECK's deployment had introduced to the community, creating prosperity that honored their values while embracing beneficial innovation. Sulik's role as cultural advisor helped ensure that technological advancement would strengthen, rather than undermine, the spiritual practices that defined Arroyo's identity. His understanding of both traditional wisdom and modern realities provided guidance for younger tribal members who would inherit responsibility for balancing progress with preservation of their essential character and values. The rescued villagers had begun to reintegrate into community life through healing processes that combined traditional tribal medicine with modern understanding of psychological trauma. Their recovery demonstrated resilience that characterized the Wasteland's most admirable qualities, while acknowledging that some wounds required more than time to heal, completely. As twilight painted the sky in colors that seemed less harsh than the radioactive sunsets that had characterized the Wasteland for decades. The village gathered for communal meals that celebrated not just their survival, but their commitment to values that had sustained them through the darkest challenges. These dinners represented more than nutrition. They embodied social bonds that had proven stronger than technological superiority or ideological extremism. The conversations that flowed around these gathering places touched on questions of identity, responsibility, and the relationship between individual achievement and collective welfare that would continue to shape post-war civilization as communities throughout the Wasteland worked to build societies worthy of the sacrifices made to secure their freedom from systematic oppression. Radio transmissions now carried signals from settlements throughout the region that coordinated trade, shared information, and provided mutual assistance during emergencies that occasionally still challenged even the most prepared communities. The communication networks that had once served the Enclave's surveillance and control purposes were being adapted for democratic coordination that respected community autonomy while enabling collective action when circumstances required unified responses. The night sky above Arroyo sparkled with stars that seemed brighter than they had appeared during the quest's most dangerous moments, their light unfiltered by the atmospheric pollution and electromagnetic interference that had characterized areas contaminated by advanced military technologies. The celestial display provided perspective on humanity's place within natural systems that dwarfed even the most ambitious technological achievements dot in the distance. The lights of other settlements twinkled like earthbound stars, representing communities that had chosen cooperation over conflict, mutual aid over exploitation, democratic development over authoritarian control. These communities formed networks of relationship that created security through interdependence rather than isolation, strength through diversity rather than uniformity. The chosen one walked quietly through Arroyo's restored streets, reflecting on the journey that had transformed them from a village warrior into someone who had confronted the most dangerous enemies of post-war civilization and emerged victorious through courage, wisdom, and the support of companions who had become family. Their personal growth mirrored their community's evolution from desperate survival toward sustainable prosperity. As the village settled into peaceful sleep, protected by guards whose vigilance was now routine rather than desperate. The sounds of the desert carried different meanings than they had before the quest began. The wind through restored vegetation whispered of renewal rather than decay. The distant calls of wildlife spoke of ecological recovery rather than contamination. The crackle of dying fires promised warmth and safety rather than temporary respite from constant danger. The future stretched ahead with possibilities that seemed unlimited by the constraints that had defined post-war existence for previous generations. The knowledge gained through confronting the Enclave's systematic evil had provided understanding necessary for preventing similar threats while the values preserved. Through tribal tradition offered guidance for using technological capabilities wisely rather than destructively. The Wasteland's long journey from nuclear devastation toward sustainable civilization continued through the efforts of communities that had learned to balance individual freedom with collective responsibility, technological advancement with moral development, progress with preservation of values that gave meaning to survival itself. The story of the Chosen One had ended, but the larger narrative of humanity's recovery from its greatest failure toward its highest aspirations would continue through the choices made by every person who chose cooperation over conflict, healing over harm, hope over despair. In this peaceful village where green leaves rustled in gentle evening breezes and clean water flowed through channels that nourished abundant life, the dreams of all who had sacrificed for a better future had finally found their fulfillment in reality that honored their memory through continued commitment to the values they had died defending.